Good morning, good afternoon, good day, and good evening. Now, I don't know what time of day it is where you're at, but for me, it's the good time of day. We're back at it again today. It is another day, another dollar, so to speak, and we are here to talk about something that is affecting everybody, no matter where you're at, especially just after this time of COVID. Unless you were on that higher end spectrum, you didn't get to feel the effects of poverty on some of us, but to understand that there is a direct correlation between poverty and crime. And a lot of times, what happens is that we like to make the correlation between drugs and crime. It's what's pushed, it's the narrative that we have in our society on a regular basis. Today, one of the things I want to highlight as we get to talking about it, as we get to going through it, is that the narratives sometimes, and not just sometimes, many times, the narrative of poverty of drugs being the relation to crime that everybody's concerned with. Because most people, they're like, well, if you do drugs, then you're going to commit crime. And one of the things that we discussed previously, and we'll highlight it again when I really get into this, is the fact that black people and white people do drugs at around the same rate. And while we do drugs at around the same rate, black people are incarcerated for drugs at a higher rate than what white people are. The other aspect to that, and why I want to come back to that thought process, but the other aspect to that, and something that's just as important, if not more important in this regard, is that drugs per se, I'm not gonna say drugs per se, but drugs are by definition in our culture, in our society, they're illegal. And if they're illegal, if you get caught with them, using them, or selling them, then that is by definition a crime. So one of the things that we're going to focus on is not necessarily all crime, but crimes other than drug related crimes. We're going to look at violent crime specifically to see the correlation between the two, because to say that drug as a obviously, if you're using drugs and you get caught using drugs, or if you're using drugs and you get caught selling drugs, or if you're selling drugs and you get caught selling drugs, however you want to phrase that, if that is what happened, then by definition you are a criminal. And there's going to be a direct correlation between drugs and criminality, because drugs are made criminal in this country. What I want to focus on is not the act of using drugs or even selling drugs. What I want to focus in on are violent crimes, right? So the thing that we're saying, that if you take drugs or if you use drugs or if you sell drugs, it's a slippery slope that leads you to committing violent crimes, that leads you to doing heinous things towards other individuals. And that's where I want to focus in on, because otherwise we begin to muddy the waters, because by the very definition of it, using drugs is a crime. So you can always, until we change that aspect of it, state that yes, there is a direct correlation between drugs and crime, because selling drugs by definition is a crime. So if you're doing drugs, then you're committing a crime, and there's a direct correlation. I don't understand. I hope that you're getting exactly whereas I'm coming from with this. But drugs themselves, and focusing on the correlation in that sense of drugs to crime, is not as advantageous as focusing in on the real culprit to many violent crimes in society. And as normal, I'm going to have charts and papers that I've looked at, and I'm going to share some of that with you. And I know a lot of it can be boring, and I'm going to try and see if we can, instead of muddling through and pointing out this, that, and I'm going to show you where the source is at. And from talking about the source of it, I'm going to get into the fact of what the crime is, or the correlation between drugs and crime, right? Because again, many times the simple fact that you are engaging either in taking drugs or selling drugs is by definition a crime. So I don't want to focus on that, because you can always say that yes, there's a direct correlation, and crime raises with drug use or drug selling, because by definition those activities themselves are crime. What do we have here from Dhani? Dhani says, isn't it on us personal responsibility to identify the narrative and to choose to accept or reject it. I personally find myself rejecting most narratives these days. I would agree with you that there is a level of personal responsibility that goes along with that. I definitely agree with that aspect of it. However, I will also state that, or I'm not gonna say state it that way. I looking at it, and if you're in a situation where, for most people, the narrative has been this, that, and the other, and you bought into the narrative. Work hard. That's what's going to get you ahead. Or do these things. That's what's going to get you ahead. Or these things are valuable, right? Those narratives, if you bought into them, if you were a child and you bought into them, however that went along those lines, if you bought into those narratives, realizing or recognizing that you've been lied to, and then having to take yourself out of those narratives to be able to say, okay, if those were wrong, what else is wrong? And I think that, yes, there's a level of personal responsibility, but I think that more so, or more importantly, there's a level of education that needs to go into that as well, or informing, making sure that the knowledge base is there for everyone out there. Because the narratives, I agree with you, there's a lot of narratives out there that are wrong, that are abject, as a definitively that you can point to, you can look at them. We're dealing with a lot of them today, where you get a narrative or you get a position by society that this is what you need to be doing, and if you bought into it and you go, oh, I can trust them, and then you realize, no, I can't, right? So a lot of people had. I'll use the instance with Edward Snowden. So up until Edward Snowden released the treasure trove that he did of documentation that showed that the United States was actually violating the Constitution in regards to its citizens, the narrative up until that point was, yeah, it's possible, but there's no proof of that. And you couldn't talk about it. You couldn't bring up proof of it, because if you did, then that was a crime. So up until Edward Snowden decided that, hey, I'm going to get kicked out of the country, I'm going to pay the price so that we can kill this narrative of the United States not violating your constitutional rights, not having mass surveillance, unwarranted mass surveillance on the entire population. Up until that point, it was all conjecture. Up until that point, it was all speculation. Up until that point, it was a narrative, as you point out, that people were like, well, there's no real proof against it. So I think informing people, making sure that they have the evidence that goes in line with that, I think that that's just as important. What was the next point that you were making down here? Is like lack of education and impending economic empowerment, and more of advocating crimes, violent and non-violent. I say violent crimes, I'm all on board with. I say, if you kill somebody, but to start putting a stigma that the impetus or the instigating factors for it is something that's a non-violent crime, or it's a non-violent crime now, because we categorize things such as drugs as being crimes, which in reality, what you do with your consciousness, right? That's a personal decision that people make. Now again, this goes back to the informational aspect. Can we inform you as to these are the positives and the negatives that could come from it? These are things that could happen behind you doing this, and this. These are the negative health impact that it could have on you. And then you get to decide, hey, I want that train wreck, right? You go to a dope man and you see his clients and you see them all out there, and you walk into the trap house and you see everybody in there all cracked out, and you go, that won't apply to me. I'll do it anyway, even though someone probably already tells you, like, those are the end results that you're looking at. And somebody tells you that, and you go, I'm gonna roll that. I'm a gambler. I'm gonna roll the dice. That's a choice that somebody gets to make, right? So it's not the empowerment or the economic empowerment is another impetus. But if you have a job and if you're doing well, as I alluded to initially, white people and black people do drugs at just about the same rate, or actually at a higher rate for white people than for black people. And yet white people maintain their jobs, get to be functional drunks, functional alcoholics, functional drug abusers at work, and they go home and they do it, and nobody said, and so long as they don't make a fuss about it, nobody says anything else to them. But they have the economic means and wherewithal in order to keep up with their habits. right? Whatever their vices are, they have the economic means in order to keep up with those vices. And so long as they have those, then it's okay. Let's see. What was the other comment that you had before I jump in? I don't want to miss these. Conditioned, indoctrinated, and or force-fed those narratives. I understand and agree. It's truly sad and kind of upsetting. Trying to find ways to channel that anger right now. Yeah, I agree. For me, the channeling of the anger right now, I guess it's kind of my channeling of the anger. It's the offloading of data, right? So I've on this thing like everybody else, this journey in life, and I could either look at it from this perspective of keeping all the knowledge that I've gained, where the things have gone wrong, and what it is that we can do in order to change it, and how we can sit there and actually affect those changes. Or I can sit there and take it, I can share it like I'm doing now, or I can just, they'll learn. They'll learn the same way I did. They'll go through the school of hard knocks and they'll figure it out just like I did. And some people like to go through the school of hard knocks. I'm not one of those people. And if I say I want to be a little more wise, wherein how a smart man learns from his mistakes and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others, I would love to have had the wherewithal earlier on with individuals, and I did that and I did have that in many aspects of my life. But then there's other aspects of my life where those who I respect, love, cherish, and value their input, they were also duped and didn't have an idea about how these things actually worked, how these things actually went about. So to that end, that's where I'm at with it. Let's see, what was the next comment here? Gospel News says, "Hello, I got you on that LOL." To have program from them and the door of the black man. To have the program us and close the door on the black man. If I'm assuming, I'll let you clarify that for me, so I'm not assuming. But yeah, so let's see. And the system ain't broke. It's working exactly the way it's supposed to, and that is exactly right. We need to get out of this mindset that the system is broken. The system is not broken. The system, it's only broken if it's not working the way it's intended. And for us, it's working exactly the way it was intended to work, right? The oppression of Black people, the oppression of poor people, the ability for the system that for you to get ahead requires that you oppress others. So when you're dealing with those, that's exactly how the system is intended to function. And so long as you understand that it is not broken, it's working as intended. What do we have here? What's the next one? Okay. The door they fire them. Oh, okay. Got it. Appreciate the clarification there, Gospel News. Appreciate the clarification. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here is that in many places, and they've done extensive studies. As I started to look at this, I was like, okay, well, maybe there's not a whole lot of study on this, and there's not a whole lot of data on it. And I was completely, utterly, wholly wrong. I was ignorant as to the amount of data that we have that shows a correlation between poverty and violent crime. That in areas where you have abject poverty, there is a high correlation between poverty and crime. As a matter of fact, they have heat maps that show it, not just like graphs which I like graphs. I'm one of those nerdy individuals. I get in there on my L7 and I get to loving watching graphs and charts and whatnot in order to pull that information in. However, one of the things that really gets to me, I say you can actually show a 1-to-1 or even a 1-to-many on heat maps, is showing that in these areas where you have a high concentration of crime, high concentration of crime, there's a high concentration of poverty as well. And I'm going to share those with you as well. And it is really interesting to me that as you go through this process and as you're looking at it, it's not drugs. That's the gateway to crime. If you're worried about somebody getting bust over the head and something taken from them, it's not that you have to worry about someone who is on drugs doing it. You have to worry about someone who is in poverty doing it. And it was shocking to me that it wasn't just here in the United States, because they've done studies not just here for the United States, but internationally. They've done studies in China. As a matter of fact, one of them, let me share this one with you, because it was interesting to me that when I looked at it, the study, let me make sure I got the right one up here before I share my screen here. Yeah, this is the right one. So let me share this. Let me share this with you. So again, this is from that NIH.gov website. Again, you can kind of guess, kind of see that I love .gov.org websites. They compile the data for us, put all that information out there, and we could either deny the data or we can acknowledge it for what it is. And then when you're looking at it here, the title shows that it's not just an American phenomenon, right? This is something that deals with capitalism in general or around the world in general, because is poverty the mother of crime? Evidence from homicide rates where? In China. So around the world, whether you're on this side of the globe or on the complete opposite side of the globe, from here to China, poverty has a direct correlation with crime. And I'm not going to bore you with all of the findings here. And they did a lot of statistics here between crime and poverty, right? So I'm not going to bore you and share all the charts and the formulas that they went through. I did enjoy myself. I'll be honest about it. I do enjoy this type of nerdy stuff. I do enjoy the statistics behind it. But I'm going to get down here to the bottom. Let me come down here to where they have the conclusions. There we go. Conclusions. And so here it says there is burgeoning literature in the relationship between income inequality and violent crimes. And this is in China again. This is not even here in the United States. I'm gonna segue from here, from China over to the United States. But it's like the majority of the line of the literature attributes the widespread inequality as a driving force. And I just realized it's so small on your screen. Let me see if I can make this bigger for you. Give me a moment here. There we go. How big? Does it look right on your screen? I think it does. Okay. Let's leave that there. All right. There's a burgeoning literature in the relationship between income inequality and violent crimes. The majority of this line literature attributes the widening inequality as a driving force of higher violent crimes. However, the relationship may be spurious once some poverty measure is added, as argued by a handful of studies. The current paper provides support to the latter argument using court convictions on homicides throughout China, many census data on incomes, and migration survey data, all at the prefecture level. We find that it is the poverty level in rural areas and the average income levels in urban areas rather than the income inequality. So it's not income, it's actual income levels, not income inequality, that contributes to the local rate of incident of violent crimes in China. This finding is robust against different measures of inequality and different empirical formulations. Apart from poverty of rural areas, the transferred violence of internal immigrants pushes the crime rate. So here we're looking at it, and definitively, there is a correlation between crime in China and crime and poverty, right? And I'm gonna touch on getting to the United States here in a moment. Let's see, some of that just hype media, yes, I would agree with that. And then we have, if the people are tired of this system of government and God judgment is sitting upon the earth. I'm waiting. I'm like you, I'm waiting. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting, there's also things I'm going to do. We're going to educate. We're going to see if we can come to an understanding on what it is I can do. As a talking about God's judgment, here's how I'm going to look at this. Speaking at it from I guess a biblical levels, as if I'm looking at it from that perspective, I look at you have Joseph in your name, Joseph Smith. I look at it how Joseph did it. When Joseph was younger, he didn't realize snitches got stitches. He was just trying to be a good son to his father. He had to learn the hard way, but he did what he could to be a good son to his father. But that got him sold into slavery. He's a slave in the house of Potiphar. He did what he needed to do while he was in the house of Potiphar, not just woe is me. He rose all the way to the top of the house of Potiphar. So he rose to the top in his family as a highest son. He rose to the top of Potiphar's house, got tossed in jail, right? So now he's in there in jail, and he rose in rank in jail to the point where he was, I guess you could call him the highest trustee in the jail, because the warden didn't do anything. He sent all the inmates to Joseph, go handle it. And then from there, in the house of Pharaoh, he rose to second in command in all of Egypt, and had very favorable things for the Israelites at that time. So in each of those incidents I gave you, he didn't just sit back and go, I'm just going to wait on God on it. God did his part. He did his. I'm going to do my part, which I'm going to try and see if we can educate. I'm going to sit there and pass on knowledge, and everything else I'm leaving in the hands of God, right? So educate, pass on knowledge. If I can participate in whatever the system is in order to make sure that we get it there, and then once God steps in, I'm going to step back and also let that happen. So in the meantime, and in between time, I'm going to do what I can for that one. Let's see, what else do we have? In America, they would like you to think black people are the problem, but Seattle and the places they are naming are white. That is exactly right. It is poverty. It is not black people. It is not drugs. It is poverty. And in China, it's not even poverty, income inequality. It's just the level that people have where they are not able to meet their day-to-day needs. That's one of the things I'm going to show you here in a moment. But it's the people not being able to meet whatever their needs are. And the issue in that regard, and there was two papers. I'm not going to share either of them today because I'm saving them for something else. But they go to show the amounts that they're paying for prisoners, right? Actually, one of the papers actually alludes to it. This guy kind of on a racist tint in his paper, that it was an econ paper, but it was kind of racist in how he approached it. But I want to share this paper because it's even though it's racist, it's very insightful in the fact that, because he's trying to pin it on black people, but then there was a direct correlation between the black people and poverty levels and crime being committed. And he kind of glossed over that aspect of it. He just wanted to, at the end, he just wanted to make sure there was a correlation between black people and crime. Give me a moment here. Let me see. What else do we have here? And the youngest. Let's see. Make sure I read that in order. So, oh, yes, the white and the youngest. I agree. I definitely agree with that. So as you're going through it, as you're looking at it, as you're considering all these different aspects to it, it's interesting that the things that they really don't want to talk about, the aspects of this that they don't want to really consider, is the impact of poverty on it, because then it means that there's something that has to be done. It means that we have to acknowledge that there is inequity within the system, and that this merit-based system, and I put the air quotes here, quote unquote, merit-based system, is not always based on merit. As a matter of fact, I would argue, especially when you read books like Malcolm Gladwell's book that dealt with outliers, right? His book that was titled Outliers. That one always put it into the framework of the two-part equation, right? There was the work that you put in, the effort that you did, the thing that you could actually control. You can control what you do. You don't control anybody else around you. You can try to, put influence by anticipating how they're going to react or any of those type of things. You can try to, in dealing with individuals, have not just a level of influence on them, but try to also influence yourself as far as how you feel. But if you're going to feel some type of way about something, you're going to feel some type of way about something, right? If you're going to be stuck in your feelings, you're stuck in your feelings. But at the same time, one of the things that you do control is, while it might not be your feelings and how you feel, you control what you do. You control whether or not you act on those feelings. And that is one of those things that, as we're in this system that we're dealing with right now, with the level of inequity between classes in regards to finances, there's also the situation whereas we have this caste system that's also there. So there's a class caste system and there's a race caste system, and they both are functional within each. But let me read, and let me not miss too many comments. Hold on one second. Let me get in here. It says, do you know the faces are changing in jail where they are white, where they were more whites now entering prison? I can definitely see that. I'll share some. good white folks, this has to stop. Right? I can see that as well. LOL. Yeah, and I agree with you. White people do make up a good portion of prison. As a matter of fact, by the BOP's own statistics, if you go to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, right, not the state, and you can do it for your own state as well, wherever, as in you'll see it in your own state. But the thing about it the reason why I do federal, because I'm talking to a wider audience. Federal is standard across the board. Each state, the statistics, they skew slightly one way or the other. But when you look at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they have a list of the ratio, rather. Well, it is a list, but it's a ratio when you go down that list of the prison population, the makeup. And Black people, while according to the census, we make up 14.8% of the population. Let's just round it up and we'll say 15% of the population. We make up 38 or 39%, if you're rounding it, percent of the prisons. White people make up an even larger portion than that, but white people make up over 70% of the population. So if we're looking at it, by ratio, and we start looking at the percentage of people doing drugs, because by far and away, not even close. When I say not close, it is not close on white people and Black people doing drugs in this nation, right? They've done study after study after study, and we've highlighted it in previous episodes, and we talked about it in previous episodes, and I brought up the statistics and showed you by the graphs and by the numbers, whether it's in college with people who are more affluent and not likely to go to jail, or I shouldn't say not likely, but on that path not to go to jail, who have parents or whatever, and they're in college and they're getting their college education so they can have good paying jobs while they're going into massive debt behind student loans. But at the same time, you're looking at these numbers, and in that situation, or in that environment, in that college environment, these college kids are steadily going up as far as their ceiling, but they're also still doing a lot of drugs. And the numbers show that it's more white than Black. Then they also look at the fact that in the communities, it's more white than Black that are actually doing drugs. And the only time it gets to be significant or insignificant in the levels between the two is when you're looking at selling drugs. That's when it becomes a difference. If they're selling drugs, it's around the same, with Blacks being slightly higher than whites. So I should rehash a lot of that information or a lot of those statistics and bring that stuff back in so that you guys see it again, those who probably have missed it previously. But that's the only time when there is a level playing field. However, in prison, the people being incarcerated for drugs at a higher rate than anybody else, and are just disproportionately represented, are Black people. Black people do less drugs than white people, make up less than the population of white people than white people here in the United States, and are disproportionately represented in jails and in prisons than white people. And that is sad. Let's see, you reap what you sow. I agree with that. Hello, Seattle. But when you turn on TV, what do you see? That is so that's part of it, right? So the indoctrination, everything that's going on, it's the image that's portrayed of Black people. And this is not just like how you have it in China. We talked about poverty and the correlation between poverty and crime there in China. The correlation right now between, and that has let me back up. The correlation for Black people, and you can tell what Black people are supposed to be, or what we're portrayed as here in society in general. And I say on level, Black people are entertainers in our society. We're drug dealers, drug users, and entertainers. That is how they have pegged and pigeonholed us as Black people in our society. And when you see us on TV, when you see us on media, whether it's on the news or fictionally represented, that is what it is. Criminals, drug dealers, drug users, entertainers. So successful black people, entertainers. Successful Asian people, STEM fields. Same with Indian people from India. White people are the executives, right? And then if you go to any other country, they do the same thing, right? So a lot of times you don't realize that there's a lot of us in some of these countries. You go down into Latin American countries, there's a lot of us there, right? A lot. You go down there, you just keep your mouth shut, you'll fit in, right? You can learn the language, but if you don't know the language, keep your mouth shut, you'll fit in. There's a lot of us down there, right? You get overseas, you'll be surprised. You always hear like, oh, we're only in Africa. The portrayal is that we're only in Africa. You get us around as I go around, every place I've traveled, as I get my passport and travel, we're there. We are there everywhere. But the portrayal is not that of us. Our portrayal is that we're in Africa, we're here, we came here as slaves, and that's the only time you'll find us, and that we're criminals and we're entertainers. That's it. You want to find a successful black man? He's either tap dancing a jig for the white folks, or he's dunking a basketball for the white folks, right? That is the extent of what we are. Let me see. What do we have here? So I don't miss some of these. When you hear crime, what do you think of? Exactly right. And there's we had this discussion in one of my classes one time a while back, and it was, well, it depends on what type of crime, right? So when you think of drug-related crimes, that's always us, right? But when you think of someone shooting up a school or blowing up a building, who do you think of, right? That's going to be the other people. So and they're trying to get away from that image and trying to see if they can get more of us involved in that as well. And because if we can get more of us, then they can take and just make us completely criminal. Let's see, what else do we have here? Yep. All right. Let's see. Israel. Okay. And what do we have here, Andre? This is what the media and educational system did. They said it was an indoctrination of white supremacy, black inferiority. I agree with that. I would even go so far, Andre Sabaz, as to say that I don't even like to call it the educational system. I call it the indoctrination system, right? Wherever you're at, whenever you go into it, one of the things that you do, you walk in there, and what we do across the board, wherever you're at, private school, public schools, whatever it is, you walk in, first part of the day is, I pledge allegiance to the flag. Teach you nationalism, number one. Two, they don't really teach you the history. As a matter of fact, they're fighting right now, and I have a show that's coming up, going to be dealing with CRT. They're fighting right now in order to keep, this is so asinine, they want to keep from talking about history. If you talk about history and the aspects of history that you're talking about make people feel uncomfortable, if it makes you feel, forget whether or not it actually happened or not, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you can't say it. They're passing laws in multiple states right now so that you cannot talk about what's actually going on or what actually happened in history. So I would definitely agree with you. The media is helping in that indoctrination, as well as what you call the educational system. I call it the indoctrination system because we get in there and we want to make sure that our kids pass these tests so that they can go in and they can get good jobs, right? Not to be self-employed, not to help anybody else out in the community. You can do that if it happens, but you want them to be able to get good jobs, to become a new cog in their wheel, right? The new age slave. And if you can't do it that way, then we can get you into the prison industrial complex and you can do it that way. And think about just how sad that is, right? A lot of these young men who are going to prison for drug-related charges, whether it's because black people selling drugs a little more frequently than white people on that graph I showed. I need to find that graph and bring it back up so I can show you guys in this episode as well. It was in a previous episode, but the rates at which we do drug-related offenses, the only time it gets even close is, like I said, with selling drugs. But you think about young men who are trying to sell drugs. Are they taught about other entrepreneurial enterprises that young black and disadvantaged kids could have? Normally that answer is no. They're told to go get a good job. Wait for a little while longer and go get a good job. Not that they can take those same skills that they're going to put towards the drug trade, they could probably put it to some other trade that they want to do that will get them in this entrepreneurial mindset they have of working for themselves. Hey, I'm in a bad situation. How do I get out of this bad situation? I can sell something, or I can be entrepreneurial. Instead of teaching them how to be entrepreneurial in those situations, if you're worried about poverty and how to get out of these situations, having makers workshops within the community, places where they can go to do these type of things. We take those type of things out. We put them in white communities. They get to do that. But young disadvantaged youth, young Black people don't. And so that correlation between poverty and crime is definitely there. And I want to show some things, but I definitely want to make sure I don't miss any of these chats as well. So let's see. If you understand colonialism, you would understand the whitening up of the world. That's very much so, right? And that's one of those things I always tell everybody. Like when we talk about race, and this is going to be controversial, and it's going to piss a lot of people off, but when it came to race around the world and this level of racism and them pitching their own race as the superior race, if you were in England, it was not really about Black people fighting against each other. It was about white people fighting against each other. In Africa, we were fighting against each other. It wasn't all kumbaya at that time either. If you were in India, it was Indians fighting against each other. What the white people did, they outsourced it. They planted their flags everywhere. And the controversial statement is they were probably the best at it out of all of us, right? They went around the world and said, we're not cooperating with anybody. If you look at it historically, and I was supposed to cover that last, oh my goodness, I dropped the ball. We'll be covering that tomorrow. We will definitely cover that tomorrow, because there's some stuff historically when looking at the Black people. Historically, when you look at the primary sources, that shows that Black people and that people were traveling around the world before Columbus came here to the United States or came here to the Americas, right? So when Spain and England and France were trying to divvy up, with the help of the papacy at the time, the rest of the world, and so long as they did it under the Christian banner, then that was fine, right? And that was one of those things that they were fighting over at the time. Now we're where we're at right now, and they have it so that they've done it around the world to tame the savages and bring Christianity to everybody. And that was one of those things there. Let me get in here a moment. Let's see. Because the legalized is also when it's profitable to them, just like alcohol. Exactly right. Okay, when you look at it from that perspective, and this is where they talk about follow the money. Understanding the system's working the way it's supposed to, and it's all by design. When you look at it and you understand it from that perspective, and you understand who it's supposed to benefit, right? And if you understand the fact that we are in a caste system, in our caste system, there's two folds to it. There's class as far as poverty and wealth, and then there is a racial component. Towards the darker you are, the lower you are on that caste system. Towards the lighter that you are, the whiter you are, right? So and depending on, and if you're Black and poor, because if you're Black, you're more likely to be poor. And if you're poor, you're going to be at the bottom half. And if you're poor, you're also likely to be a criminal. So most Black people being poor, most poor people being criminals, you do the math on the 13th Amendment, and you get to see exactly how that fans out. So the benefit is you get to go to jail or the prison industrial complex. You're doing convict labor. They're making money. You are in a poverty-stricken area. You are contributing towards buying alcohol at the liquor store. What's on every street corner in a Black neighborhood? You get churches and you got liquor stores. Both of them give you about the same benefit at this point, right? So it's looking at who's making that money. There's money to be made in the Black community. It's not as much as everybody else's, but there's a level of influence because we prop up, and I talked about this in a previous episode when we talked about our sisters here, how we prop up the economics of our system is because of our buying power and how much we spend in the system. Let's see, what's the next comment? I agree. Thank you very much there, Andre Shabazz and Andre. They wrote our history off, and they wrote us, and wrote as if their history is where life, that is exactly right. I need to find this. I don't even, I have it. I don't need to find it. I need to just clip it and put it in one of these lives one day. There was a debate, and I loosely call it that, with Dr. John Hendrik Clark, met an ancestor, rest in power. He was debating with these two white people, and again, I loosely call it that. It was a cluster, if anything else. But one of the things that came out of that discussion was, as they were going, because they were talking about, they didn't like the fact that he was talking about the fact that there could have been, right, these people, as the Black Madonna or these other Black figures, which we now recognize that they were Black people. But the thing that kept on coming up from these white scholars, right, over and over again, that they kept saying, we already have a perfectly good narrative. Why do we need to throw that out when we get this new evidence or this new information? It can fit. And the telling part of that is that there is a narrative, right? There's already a narrative that's there. And we don't want to conform the narrative to the facts. We want the facts to conform to our narrative. We want to write you guys out. We want to put ourselves as a predominant. We want to ignore the fact that during the Ottoman Empire, there was a lot of white slaves in the Ottoman Empire. We want to ignore all of that type of stuff. What we want to do is put ourselves as a preeminent race, the preeminent people on this, on this earth, and have everything else back up that narrative. And if it doesn't, then everything else has to go, until we can figure out a way in order to shoehorn it in. So as you start going through and you look at a lot of the primary sources, people who actually seen the natives back in the day, and you realize, or the natives here in the Americas, and you realize that many of them are Black. The fact that they found African skeletons pre-Columbus here in the Americas, right? You look at the Olmec heads. All of these are things, when you look at them and you start finding the captains who came over here, and they start describing, such as the red Caribs, the black Caribs, the yellow Caribs. You look at it, you go, wait, there were Black Caribs, and they referred to them as people like those of Africa, colored like those of Africa. You realize that the people who actually seen them at the time and wrote down in their books at the time, their journals at the time, acknowledge that Black people were already here in the Americas long before anybody else, right? That we were a part of, even when you look at the mythology. But anyway, that's, again, I'll cover that another day. But it's interesting, like you said, they try to write us out of their history and say they're where it begins. The main research for the world fighting is because colonization, how they divide or partition the land. That is correct. Recent, not research. Okay, let's see. That start in the 1800s in Germany. There's a lot of places I actually started. All right. Because there's a lot of Europe. People don't want you to know that in Rome, there were actually Black Roman emperors. The go-to that everybody likes to talk about is Septimus Severus, or Severus. Septimus Severus would be the go-to one, but there's several others that are there historically. And then even the people that he had an issue with, one of the generals he had here, or that he had not here, but that was in then the United Kingdom. Anyway, let me segue myself back to where I needed to be. You guys, you get me going. I will talk about this ad nauseum. What do we have here from you Gospel Dudes? It says everything was Black from start or beginning. That is what all the data says, right? You look at the data on it, everything started Black. And we want to, there's a book. I really need to put that reading list out. I can't take total credit for it. A lot of it was from some very powerful brothers, such as Kandaka Sanders. And I probably shouldn't have mentioned your name. I don't know if you want me to mention your name directly, but there's a lot of brothers out there, powerful brothers, who helped to educate and enlighten me on a lot of the primary sources that were actually out there that show exactly where we came from. Brothers who are past ancestors now, like Ranoka Rashidi, So there's a lot of brothers out there that talk about a lot of these things that help to point out the origins of people in general. Uh, but yeah, as I so let me share my screen again real fast, because there's another thing I want to talk about as far as incarceration in the United States. And let me switch over here so that you guys can see this as well. Make that a little bigger. There we go. And let's see if I can make this a little bigger for you guys here. Forgive me as I'm on a different screen here. Let's see if I can make that bigger and make myself smaller. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me catch this chat here real fast. It says from Andre Sabas, the boys bought some people that was in the area in the hills and caves into some like civil life, and I'll wait till you get that thought finished. I'll come back to you once that thought's finished out. Let's see. So here, this was a incarceration and poverty in the United States, and this was one read by the American Action Forum. It's an .org. It says the United States currently incarcerates 2.2 million people, nearly half of whom are non-violent drug offenders, accused people held pretrial because they cannot afford their bail, and others who have been arrested for forfeiture to pay debts or fines for minor infractions. Poverty and excess legal punishments contribute significantly to the United States' high rate of imprisonment, which has disproportionately affected low-income and minority populations. Without reducing poverty and more specifically income inequality, as well as racial bias and rolling back harsh sentences for certain crimes, the United States will not meaningfully reduce its prison population. And it goes on, but it talks about who's being incarcerated: drug offenders, pretrial detainees, homeless, failure to pay child support, inability to pay fines, right? So poverty and overcriminalization. So we've now this paper here, the high price of cash bail. This one goes into more, not just violent crimes, but the fact that we are criminalizing poverty in this country. So now we're dealing with a situation, and I'm going to get into poverty in a moment, or into the correlation between violent crimes and poverty in a moment. But not only do we have crime in this country, or a correlation between crime and poverty, but we're criminalizing people for being poor. And when you go back and you look at things like back in the day, they had this system called peonage. And so during that system of peonage, after the Civil War, around the time of Jim Crow, what they would do, Black people were, specifically here in the South, Black people had a tendency of sharecropping and trying to figure out where it is that they could work in order to get some kind of living. And they would go from town to town to do it, didn't live in a town, and not living in a town and not having they would make a law that if you didn't have so much money, then you were a vagrant, especially if you didn't have X amount of dollars and you didn't have a place to stay there in that town, and you were just passing through on the railroad, as a lot of Blacks at that time were wont to do. They criminalized that behavior. Working Black men traveling between towns was criminalized, specifically at a certain time. And they seen you as a hard working buck. They criminalized your poverty, bought you in, and they had someone pay your bail. And in turn, they bought that person. So it was an end around at the time on slavery. They still needed somebody to work their fields. They didn't want to pay somebody to work their fields. They found a way or a pretense charge in which to charge them in order to bring them in to work them on their fields, or whatever the convict labor, whether it was in the coal mines or wherever, that they could work them. And now it was even more lucrative than it was during the times of slavery. So we've criminalized poverty at that time under peonage, is what I'm using as the example or the analogy, and segueing to today, where we look at all the different ways in which an individual can go to jail or be in prison for poverty, right? So you look at all the different aspects here, and let me share this again with you. You look at all these different aspects of how it is that you can be incarcerated. Pretrial detainees. So you're in court, or drug offenders. We know that that's by far and away the largest number of the population that's in federal prison is for drug offenses. Pretrial detainees. If you're in court, if you're in, say, going to court and you're before trial and they detain you, you're incarcerated. And the sad fact of it is, as a rule, and it is put out as a in especially here in Texas where I'm at. When you look at the laws that are on the books, you're not supposed to be able to use bail as an instrument of oppression. And when you set bail too high, and there's no real reason why you should set the bail that high, or there's a reason why you're now using it as an instrument of oppression. So a person who can't pay bail is stuck in jail. All right. If you're homeless, that's a reason. Failure to pay child support. So let's say that you are a father and you can't pay child support. You go to jail because you can't pay child support. Now that you can't pay child support, you get out of jail. You've lost your job. You're not able to pay child support at that time. Now that you've lost your job and you're out, they come back to you and say, hey, can you pay this child support? It's like, no, I still can't pay the child support. You can't pay the child support still? Back to jail with you. So that impoverished person is not making any headway. They're going to stay in jail. Inability to pay fines. So you're in there, you can't pay a fine. You have a fine. Can you pay it? No, you're going to jail. So poverty and overcriminalization. So these are just some of the reasons that these individuals, they noted on why it is that people are being put in jail and how it is we're criminalizing poverty, right? How is it that we're criminalizing poverty? What is it that we're doing in order to make it so that it's criminal to be poor? These are some of the things that we're doing. Let me make sure I catch up on some of these chats. Give me a minute. Let me get back in here. What do we have? Forgive me, I was working and talked in the mic. No worries. I've done that on plenty of occasions. Thank you very much for that, Andres. Let's see. Last call for insight. Ask Savior Black. Good evening, sir. Good evening to you too. Last call for insight. So yeah, so here it is that we're just talking about the correlation between poverty and crime. And again, this is not to say because a lot of times we like to say that it's drugs and crime. That's what but by definition, if you're doing drugs or selling drugs, that's a crime. But we're talking specifically about violent crimes. Is there a correlation? Is there a slippery slope that if you do drugs, the correlation that everybody's making is between poverty and violent crime. So let me get to this one that deals specifically with violent crimes and poverty, right? So because let's see, that's evidence matters. That's the HUD. Oh, I was going to save that one because that comes from a HUD user, but I'll come back to HUD user in a moment. Where is this other document I'm looking? There we go. Okay. So me being nerdy, me being the nerdy individual that I am, me enjoying being the nerdy individual I am. I love charts. I love graphs. Let me share one with you right now that comes from ArcGIS. This is an ArcGIS graph that deals specifically with poverty and crime. And again, I talked about it before, and this is from the story maps, arcgis.com. How does poverty affect crime, right? And it deals with a lot of heat maps on a correlation between poverty and crime. And let me come down. Let me see. Not that one. Okay, so here you can see as you move this slider back, one side deals with crime, the other side deals with poverty. And you see the correlation as you're going across the country. If it's a high poverty area, it's also a high crime area, specifically a high violent crime area, right? And you look at how that transfers, how that works together so well that if you have a high crime area, it's a high poverty area. So looking at it and going, well, oh no, it's the correlation is between drug use. You can get drug use in high poverty areas, just like you can get crime in high poverty areas. As a matter of fact, one of the things that they dealt with a lot of here is the fact that you do have a very high crime ridden area. And again, if anybody has anything that they want to add, you can put it in the chat. I also, let me drop this link again. I'm gonna drop the link again. I had the link dropped initially for the for it. So if anybody wants to jump on in and participate on the panel, by all means, you can definitely do so. The link is also down there. So in looking at this, looking at it, there is definitely a correlation between crime and poverty, right? So you can have a situation where you're in a high crime area. It's more than likely also going to have a high poverty area. And when you look at the areas that it deals with, it deals specifically with high crime and high poverty. And there is a very strong correlation in this map in doing that. Additionally, let me pull up this. That's an economist one. That's the one I want to save for another day. This is the Bureau of Justice Statistics I'm going to show you right now. All right. Let me make that a little bigger for you. Household poverty and non-fatal violent victimizations from 2008 to 2012. And this comes from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, right? And it says present findings from 2008 to 2012 on the relationship between households that were above or below the federal poverty level and non-fatal violent victimization, including rape or sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault, and simple assault. This report examines the violent victimization experience of persons living in households at various levels of poverty, focusing on type of violence, victims' race or Hispanic origins, the location of residence. It also examines the percentage of violent victimizations reported to the police by poverty level. Data are from the National Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS, which collects information on non-fatal crimes reported and not reported to the police against persons age 12 or older from a nationally representative sample of U.S. households during 2012. And it's around, it says about 92,390 households and 162,940 persons were interviewed for the NCVS, right? So and I'm reading this one because this is relatively short, but it's kind of funny where it's like persons in poor households at or below the federal poverty level, 39.8% per thousand, had more than double rate of nonviolent victimization as persons in high income households. Persons in poor households had a higher rate of violence, including a firearm, compared to persons above the FPL. The overall pattern of poor persons, this is kind of funny to me when you think about the previous administration and their portrayal of, they're saying us, they're poor, they're rapists and everything else. It says the overall pattern of poor persons having the highest rates of victimizations was consistent for both white and blacks. However, the rate of violent victimizations for Hispanics did not vary across poverty levels. Poor Hispanics had lower rates of violence compared to poor whites and poor blacks. Poor persons living in urban areas had violent victimization rates similar to poor persons living in rural areas. And poor urban blacks had rates of violence similar to poor urban whites. So poverty, regardless of black or white, the rates were around the same, right? So when you're looking at it and you're considering the level of poverty, that is a direct correlation. And this is coming directly from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, that when you're looking at poverty, there's a correlation between poverty, the level of poverty, and crime, and specifically violent crimes. So a lot of times the narrative is, hey, it's all about drug use and this, that, and the third. However, when you're actually looking at it and you look at the data, the actual correlation, the actual issues that you're going to be confronted with is going to be poverty is the direct correlation between it and crime. And all the numbers that they have, again, these are just a few studies I've highlighted and shown. But even from an economic standpoint, there's a lot of people there that there's a lot of information there from people who are economists that look at it and have concluded the same thing. So how does this affect their mindsets? It doesn't, because what they do, they hide the data, right? So you have data out there that says, hey, poverty is an issue, and we can pay prisoners or pay $38,000 a year per prisoner, right? To on the federal level, each state's a little different. Looking between my state and the federal level, it's around $40,000 a year is what you're paying per prisoner or per person incarcerated, which you would be paying which is around the average rate for someone to live comfortably in our society annually. And instead of doing the work and giving it putting that money out there throughout the year and paying it before there was criminalization, and a lot of time that criminalization is drug use, but before you even get there, you could have put that money into those families then, as opposed to afterwards, and putting them in prison. So there's a cost to society, and they just write it off. That their mindset is the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. If you're able to continue to function or to benefit financially, why would you want to change it? What makes you think they would like to change it? Think of the narrative, right? If you're a poor white, at least you're not a nigger. If you're a black person, at least you're not illegal, right? And so they keep everybody stratified, and they keep everybody in their silos, and they keep everybody at odds with one another, just by holding out that, yes, you can be greedy and take a disproportionate share of the resources, just like these horrible, rich white folks. Let's see. So if a person is poor, he has no mind. I would say, I say that's not a bad, hey, that's not a bad takeaway. I like that takeaway. I think I'm going to start using that. Normal mindset is a poor mindset. Let's see. What else do we have here? Let's see. And that's what Dr. King, that's what got Dr. King killed. He said we were going to Washington for our checks. All about the moment you start uniting, that's when it actually becomes an issue. That is honestly when it becomes an issue, right? So the order in which it needs to go, and I do agree with how he did it at the time, that we need to make sure that our communities, our families are strong, right? We need to make sure that we do things that help to get us to be better as a community, better as people, better as a family. At the same time, once we get to that level, then you can move on to, we need to to overcome the caste system. And when Dr. King, it's because you think about when our brother Shabazz, known as Malcolm X, when he stopped talking about just NOI, but all Nation of Islam, and went to the greater Islam and looked at everybody as brothers, and we're going to unite, and that was when they said he had to go. When he started talking about bringing the U.S. up to the UN on criminal charge, that was when he had to go, right? That was when they got rid of him. When Dr. King started talking about not just coalescing Black people, but also talking about a poor people's march and getting poor people involved, that was when he had to go, right? You start looking at people like Medgar Evers, and those, when people realize, okay, we need to start uniting and coalescing and getting together, and not just preach hate, then you got to go, right? You can't keep you around too much longer. You look at what Fred Hampton was doing. Fred Hampton was huge in the Black Panther Party at the time, and what they were doing with the lunch programs. And you think about where they were getting the money when you go back and you do the research, and that he was focused on the Black community, but they had white people coming in to give them money in order to make sure they could do these lunch programs for young people in the inner cities, to make sure that these programs were funded and making sure that they were going across. Now you have to go. Now you have to go. When you start benefiting people and you start actually, there's a chance that you might throw a wrench in the plan for the money. We stole this fair and square. You got to remember that. We stole this fair and square is how the system works. So the benefits are, or what you're looking for is pro-Black. This is my personal opinion on it. You want to be pro-black. You want to be as pro-black as possible because that's how the system works. Not anti-white, but pro-black. We come first. We get our community together first. We get our families together because the family is the core of our communities. So as long as we get our families together, right, and our families come together strong, and we have strong black families, right? And I'm not saying it has to be if you marry, I would prefer it if it's all black. That's my personal preference. But if you're with someone who's not black, your kids are still going to be black. So I'm not going to sit there and marginalize you, especially when you have the upcoming black population. I'm not going to sit there and alienate young black brothers and sisters based off a choice that the parents made. If they want to do it that way, that's great. But the kids are still black. You get that strong black core, strong black kids coming up with knowledge, with information, making a strong black community that can get together and address a lot of these issues, whether it's voting down ballot in some years or whatever the strategy, or not the strategy, whatever the tactics are. The strategy is getting everybody together, coalescing everything, getting strong black communities, and the tactics that we use in order to get there, whether it's nonviolence, whether it's by any means yet necessary, whether it's lunch programs or breakfast programs in the morning, whatever the tactics are. I'm not arguing with my family about tactics, right? My brothers and sisters out there, we're not arguing over tactics. Whatever your tactics are, those are your tactics. And as long as you're strong in your tactics, you're training in your tactics, we're not arguing about tactics. Strategy, we want to be in line in strategy. And let me get this last one before I get on out of here on you guys. So we always need a serving class to exist here in America and around the world. That is how they have it set up. You don't need it. It means that you would act. Don't want to get preachy. There is a desire or a need in this system for a serving class. There is a book I would recommend everyone read. It's called The Dictator's Handbook. If you ever get the opportunity to read The Dictator's Handbook, The Dictator's Handbook outlines how a lot of these systems work, whether it is an authoritarian dictatorship to a quote unquote democratic coalition, how each of these systems work and how they function, and the tactics and strategies utilized in order to keep them afloat is very telling. And as you start looking at the various countries around the world, you will start to see, when you start picking it apart and you look at it, it's like, oh, wow. And you start to notice what the motivations are. I'm going to leave you with The Dictator's Handbook would be what I would recommend. That is a phenomenal read for how things actually work. And with that being said, I appreciate all of you guys for coming in. And if I haven't told you before, I love you. I care for you a lot, fam. Hope that your day is blessed. Hope that everything went great for you, that you killed it. And if you're still in it, that you're killing it and getting ready for tomorrow, that you're going to kill that too. And may you always, always, always be blessed with peace in your life. And with that, we are